Hello, this is John Greiner with Basin Safety Consulting and Training. This month, July 2021, we're going to be covering three different topics: hand and power tools, ladder safety, and personal protective equipment, or as we in the industry call it, PPE. So we're going to kick it off with hand and power tool safety. Obviously, most of us use hand tools as a part of our job. Some of those hand tools are pre-scripted. They're in the truck. Those are the ones we need. That's all we got to think about. But for other of us, we have to pick and choose based on the job size, the job type, the type of equipment we're working on. And if that equipment varies, then we have to change based on the type of job we're doing. So typically, from a definition perspective, hand tools are simple tools used to make tasks easier and more efficient, and used when we can't, do it just with our hands. And they can be simple or they can be complex. Yesterday, I was on a location and I had to drive out to get some ice for somebody. Drove back, and on the way back, I hit a rock that was in the road, and it was kind of a lower rock, and I thought it'd be fine, but the road kind of gave way around it, and I actually hurt my rim on my tire pretty bad. I dented it and flattened the tire, and fortunately made it back to location, but it was pretty damaged. So I had to, break out the jack, break out the extensions to the jack, and try to figure out how to do it on a scurry pad that had just rained. So it was a lot of fun, and those hand tools are very simple. Not a lot that can go wrong, but I was thinking about it. Even putting the pins in for the jack extensions, you can pinch your fingers. Probably not going to be a serious recordable injury, but it can happen. So selecting the right gloves and PPE for the jobs matter. Now, at the same time, using a really thick rubber glove would not have been an effective tool. I'd have been sitting there for 30 minutes just trying to get the pins inserted correctly. But cuts can happen, scrapes can happen, pinching, amputations, impaling, smashing, lots of different things can happen to our hands when using hand tools. The hand tools themselves are not dangerous. However, the use of them can be. So just remember that. The tools sit in the toolbox, not dangerous. Using the tools improperly can be dangerous. I mean, even if we don't, if it's a tool that doesn't have a lot of grip on it, your hands get sweaty when you're working, that can cause your hand to slip and hit something else. So it's not always the tool itself. It can be other things in the area. And selecting the right PPE for the tool that you're using is also important. So selecting the right tool for the job, making sure it's inspected, that it's actually going to do the job correctly. Don't use tools for jobs that they're not intended for. So, for example, a wrench as a hammer. We've all done it. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I've never, needed to bang something and had a wrench in my hand and said, let me walk, 40 feet back to the toolbox over there and grab a hammer. I've done it. Now, was it the right thing to do? Obviously not. Am I going to do it anymore? As a safety guy, you can't ever do anything unsafe. There's like this safety police thing. They come out of nowhere. They tackle you to the ground. It's a pretty bad day. No, I'm just joking. It can happen, but obviously being an example and trying to set the right tone for everybody, you got to have the right tools for the job. And a lot of that has to do with the planning phase before you even go to the field. Thinking through what you're going to be doing and whether or not you have the right stuff. So gripping the tool firmly and once again finding the right PPE or glove if you can't grip the tool firmly. So knives and razors result in a lot of recordable injuries in oil and gas, especially razor blades for cutting wire. Electricians specifically have a lot of recordable injuries in the area for using simple box cutters. So keeping the blade sharp, even though that may be counterintuitive, a sharp tool is going to prevent having to hack at it 50 times when one time would do. For example, we always want to cut away from ourselves and cut away from other people. You don't want to have Johnny standing there helping you and cut towards him, so you cut away from yourself. That isn't the best plan. Obviously using the proper knife for the right job. Sometimes we'll use the wrong blade because once again, it's what's in our hand, it's what's in our box, it's what's, easy to grab. And so we're going to use the wrong knife. So you want to make sure you have the right thickness of blade for the thing that you're cutting. Pocket knives, most of us have them. Not really great for typical work use. They're great for, cutting some thread or a fishing line, things like that. But in the field, you want to use an industrial style knife. So choosing the right hammer is a big thing as well. Not all hammers are created the same. We have tack, framing hammers, sledges, ball peens, claws, and then red hammers, just depending on the type of work that you're doing. So make sure that you're using, once again, the right size and type hammer for what you're doing. It says here, your fist is not a hammer. If any of us have tried that, we've learned the hard way that no, our fist is not a hammer. And using your palm or something, not a good idea. So the other thing about oil and gas is using, your typical steel hammer in areas where sparks could happen and ignite a flammable mixture is a no-no. So we want to use brass hammers in those contexts. And once again, just like using a knife, you don't want to swing with somebody right behind you or in a way that it's going to bounce back and hit you. And if you're a TikTok junkie, you've seen plenty of videos of people, using hammers, especially sledgehammers, to hit something and then it bounces back and hits them in the face. And that is a painful experience. So pliers and wrenches, another hand tool we typically use, making sure that, if you need a pipe wrench, use a pipe wrench. Closed end wrenches are the best. They tend to not slip as often, but you can't always get them where you need to. There's a lot of cool new tech coming out these days. In fact, I saw an advertisement for it's kind of like mostly for plumbing, but it actually fits around a hose, and then the fitting at the top, the bolt at the top. And rather than having to use a hand tool in there where it's really tight quarters, it just powers up and spins it right around the hose. So there's some cool stuff coming out. So obviously metric sizes can be impactful, making sure you have a metric where you need a metric and not where you don't. And fixed size wrenches are always the safest bet, but again, not always. You can't always fit them where they need to be, but planning ahead, getting the right wrench is important. Power tools. So power tools obviously have made our life a lot easier. I love power tool attachments. Things you can get. DeWalt's really good about this. Milwaukee has some cool stuff out there where you can just attach something to a drill and, build a house with it. Just you spin it and the whole house goes up. We're not quite there yet, but there's a lot of cool stuff out there that you can do with these. So they pose a high risk, obviously, because you have electricity moving through them, and they're very unforgiving. So some things like a nail gun, they'll have depression triggers that you need to depress before you can actually fire a nail off, things like that. Guards, but any guards or safety equipment that's attached to these, you want to leave it on and not remove it for any reason at all. Drills are used, obviously, to drive screws. You want to make sure you have the right size drill. Again, not something that I've ever done, using a smaller drill for a bigger project and then just like using all your muscle and body strength to push the screw in. I've never done that. But it does happen from time to time. So you want to make sure you have the right size and powered wrench, screwdriver or driver for what you're trying to do, or drill. So holding the drill firmly is also important, making sure you don't, hit yourself or others with a bit. Saws, another hand tool. I'm obsessed with saws. I've got probably more than I need. They're just nice to have around. In fact, I'm buying a saw today for cutting steel and pipe. So love saws, but once again, with the guards and protective items on there, you want to make sure you keep those in place. So always, use extreme caution. If you don't have a guard installed to prevent your hand from going in it, highly recommend that. If you use saws a lot, there's a type of saw out there. It's a little bit pricey, but it actually detects if flesh is in the blade. So if it hits, something that's made of flesh, it'll automatically stop. I'll actually include a link in the video here. I'll find that and put it right in the video at this point. So never leave them plugged in when unattended. It's always good to unplug the saws when you're done with them, just so that they can't be accidentally powered up. And then again, it's a good idea to have, if they have a spot for a bag or like a debris catch bag, make sure that that's installed so debris doesn't go around and blow around and get in your eyes or in other people's eyes and breathing in, etc. So guarding grinders is one of the biggest OSHA violations out there. People remove the guards because you can't, use you can pretty much without the guard use about 270 to 280 degrees of that wheel. With the guard, you're looking at 90. So a lot of people are going to extend that by removing the guard. Again, the reason that guard is there isn't to protect you from touching it only, although that's a big part of it. It's that if that grinder wheel breaks, it doesn't spin back and hit you because the guard's going to catch it. You can see in the photo here and there are so many photos out there of grinder wheels breaking and hitting people and then stopping in their body. So you want to make sure that you keep those guards in place. Sparks are another big issue here. They can protect against that as well. Not a bad idea to have a shield of some sort, a poly shield or something that you can use to make sure it doesn't get back onto you. Now, when you go to use a wheel of any type, whether it's a grinder wheel or a fixed grinder wheel, you want to give it a ring test before you use it. You just take a wrench or a screwdriver and kind of lightly tap it, and it should give you a nice resonant ring. If you hear a thud or a dud, that means that there's a crack in it somewhere. It's not a solid piece of metal, and so you want to go ahead and get rid of that one and install a new one. So, wearing the proper safety glasses, keeping your hands and fingers out of areas. I always laugh at this picture on the bottom right, because that actually, I used to have that sweatshirt, so I always think, man, was that me when I was in high school? It wasn't me, but that's probably some stuff that I would have done back then. Making sure you have the right PPE, you're planning the job effectively, so that, if something does, you always want to think worst case scenario. If this grinder wheel breaks while I'm grinding, what's going to happen? Well, it could come back and hit me. All right, I'm going to stand off to the side. If this shrapnel breaks while I'm hammering, if this comes off, am I standing in the line of fire? Am I out of the line of fire? And obviously, we want to document all of that on the JSA. So use the right tool for the job, plan the job accordingly, and make sure you bring the right tools with you. Because if you don't have the right tool in the truck, when you get to the job site, it's going to be very easy and convenient to use the wrong tool. So we want to make sure we plan effectively prior to leaving the shop so we have the right stuff with us. And if your company hasn't gotten you the right tools, and if you ask for them over and over, definitely keep pushing, because, having the wrong tools, or, some tools are really expensive and we can, quote, make do without them, but we want to make sure we have the right tools at all times. All right, moving into our second topic, ladder safety. And I'm going to bust out my Billy picture, because I love the Billy picture. It's probably, I use it as I put it in here. I'm like, have I overused this photo this year? I probably have, but it just fits in so many different scenarios, and that's this photo right here. Now, yes, I recognize that I've used it too many times, but again, ladder safety, making sure that there's so many things wrong with this picture. That's why I love to use it. But we want to make sure that, we're protected from falling. We're not extending ourselves. We're not reaching farther than we should. We're not stepping on the top rung. They're positioned correctly against the building. There's the proper extension past the point of intersection or point of contact. A lot of different things in ladders we want to make sure that we're doing right. As well as the load strength, we want to make sure we have the right load strength for the type of ladder that we're using. So, quick statistic here, 300,000 people every year are treated for falls from ladders. 300,000. That's like half of the state of North Dakota every single year is treated from a fall injury from a ladder, or some version of a ladder, as you can see here in the middle. It's actually pretty clever there. A pretty good understanding of engineering, not a great understanding of safety. Maybe invent something like that actually does it. That's actually not a bad idea. But ultimately, yes, making sure that we have, ladders used correctly. So working at home, just a quick sidebar, can be as dangerous as working at work with ladders. In fact, a lot of those injuries of those 300,000, I'm sure, happen at somebody's house. My dad's fallen off a ladder. I had an old boss fall off of a ladder. My dad broke his wrist. My old boss, he actually went into a coma and was not the same for a long time afterwards. Now he's kind of gotten back to his old self, but it took a long, long time for him to heal up on that. So even at home, cleaning the gutters, whatever. If you can get a man lift, great. And my dad now gets man lifts. If he can get a man lift, he's at Home Depot, he's renting a man lift, just so he doesn't have to, risk it. So a couple different types of ladders. You have fixed and portable ladders. Portable means we can move them. Fixed means they're bolted to something. Pretty straightforward. Step ladders, or A-frame ladders as some people call them. These are all the kind of anatomy of a step ladder. A couple things about them. The spreaders need to be locked into place when we're using them. We always want to climb up the actual, step side, not the back side, the rear side rail side. The top cap, don't want to stand on that. And then obviously maintain 3 points of contact. They should also have anti-slip safety feet. So those are kind of grips, and they're angled, so they're proper with the ground. If you can't get a level footing with the ladder, you're going to need to reassess the ground there, rather than, having it kind of angled, because these are designed to be perfectly flat on a stable surface. If we've got rocks, debris, material, etc. underneath them, their stability is 100% compromised. A couple other things: make sure it's appropriate for the type of job you're doing. This is kind of a no-no here. I'm pretty sure that's not a Type 1A ladder, and that's easily 300 pounds on that thing, and we'll get into that in a little bit. So make sure it's rated for the type of weight. This obviously is not, extension ladder designed for that purpose. It's a step ladder, but it's being used as an extension ladder. And these other points I've already covered. So standing on top step, that's a no-no. They call it the cap, the ladder cap. Don't want to step on the cap. So, and again, make sure your extensions are all the way down and locked. Now, the reason for that, obviously, it maintains stability. It was designed and engineered to support the load it's supposed to carry, with it completely set up the way it's supposed to be. And again, flush and even on the ground. You don't want to be on slippery surfaces either. As I mentioned, rocks, dirt, etc., can impact the stability. So extension ladders, we have one of these at the shop we use quite often. It's got an adjustable foot pad and foot shoe assembly. They have locks in them. You want to make sure that those are always put into place. Sometimes they'll have a rope, sometimes they won't. And again, even with these, you want to avoid stepping on the top rung if you can. So a couple things about extension ladders. They can get stuff in the tracks sometimes, rocks, debris, etc. So you want to make sure those are clear. When you go to raise them, I recommend having two people just so it doesn't tip back on you, get out of control. And then obviously make sure that the feet are securely planted, and not a bad idea to have somebody hold the base or secure the base with some method prior to ascending the ladder. All right, a couple other things about extension ladders. So there's a proper ratio. It's 4-to-1 from the point of intersection to the base of the ladder, and you'll see here they're not in the image. They're not doing the equation from the edge of the building, but they're doing it from where it actually makes contact with the roof pitch. So that's where you'll want to kind of draw back. So from that point, you want to be 4 feet back to the base of that ladder. Then the other calculation you want to make sure you do is 3 feet above that point of contact or the point of intersection. So really, if it's a 20-foot tall building, essentially the base of that ladder would be 5 feet back because it's divisible by 4. And obviously the roof overhangs, etc. Those are all things that we need to take into consideration. All right, so too much of an angle, obviously too far, the bottom can slip. Too close, the ladder can tip back. So it's about a 70-degree angle. There's even other, there's an app on your phone you can get, and you can actually line it up in an image, and it'll tell you if your ladder is at the right angle. But 70 degrees is the, I don't know if a lot of us are carrying around protractors, but if you have an industrial protractor, that could also square you away. So again, we got that 3 foot. Need to make sure you have that 3 foot. So as I mentioned, the feet on these are typically adjustable. They've got the grips on them. These can get worn out, so you want to change them, which is a pretty simple process to change those out. You can buy them at Grainger or hardware store, wherever you go. There are spiked ones you can get if you're working a lot of grass or dirt. So that's obviously a good securing tool for those, and I recommend those if you need them. So straight ladders and extension ladders similar. Obviously these are fixed. They don't change in size rather, but basically all the same safety features. Adjustable feet. You want to make sure your point of contact is 3 feet above where you're at, etc. And if you can't get 3 feet above, let's say you're just going up a few rungs and it's up against the building, fine. Just remember to maintain that 70-degree angle or 1-to-4 ratio. All right, so fixed ladders. Get into this real quick. In oil and gas, we have a few different types that we'll run into. Obviously, in our large storage tanks, we'll have them. Gas compression plants will have them. Pumping units have them. A lot of different equipment out there has it. Diesel tanks, treaters, etc. So with those, you can use lanyards, harnesses, and SRLs. At the bottom here, you'll see that they have a double lanyard. Not a bad idea if you're climbing these. Just click them on the rung. Those things will hold you up. They're designed to hold 5,000 pounds on a steel fixed ladder. Eventually, probably all these will have SRLs installed at the top, so you can just kind of anchor yourself to the SRL and lift yourself up, even to a belt, which would be nice. So there are different ways to protect yourself climbing up fixed ladders. So we always want to, for all ladders, depending on the type, we want to follow the manufacturer's recommendation, which should be on the side. Now, if they've washed away or the sun has baked them away, it's a good idea to get a new one. You can order them online from the manufacturer and go ahead and stick them on. All right, so duty ratings. There's 5 different types here, from 200 pounds to 375 pounds. So, the 200-pound ones are usually lighter, in your aluminum type, etc., but they get heavier duty as you go. So 300 pounds is considered extra heavy duty. I recommend the type 1A, and I'll tell you why. If I'm, 250 pounds, I'm not saying that's what I weigh, but pretty much what I weigh. If I'm 250 pounds and I'm carrying some stuff up, I got tools, etc., it's going to be pretty easy to get up there to 300 pounds, carrying an air compressor, whatever I have strapped on my back. So I want to make sure, that the ladder is designed to hold the weight that I'm putting onto it. So when climbing or working from a ladder, you must face the ladder at all times. Again, 3 points of contact. You don't want to straddle the top. That's a no-no. I already talked about not stepping on the top cap, etc. That's a no-no. All right, so if you need to, obviously, if you need to be leaning to do something, a little bit, not a big deal, but obviously you don't want to get, essentially your center of gravity over one of the rails there at all, because, something like this photo would happen. So if you need to move the ladder to position yourself better, climb down the ladder and reposition it, have another ladder there that you can climb up, if you don't want to be moving your ladder all over the place. So then obviously we have other methods of engineering controls, such as man lifts. Man lift is an engineering control because it's a fixed protective system that you don't need to get down, move around, etc. Typically have guardrails, tow rails, etc. to protect you from falling out. So these are kind of if you have to work at heights, highly recommend getting a man lift if you can. We have one at the shop, just a little scissor lift like the one shown in the photo here. Extremely helpful. We got to change lights in the shop. I tell you, it's not. it's frankly not practical to use a ladder for that purpose. So again, 3 points of contact. Don't lean too far, reach too high, or reach too far out. Hold on, keep centered, center of balance. Basically, your core needs to be right in the middle of where those rungs are, and that's how to protect yourselves. No reason to rush. 3 points. If you need tools, have them tied off on a tool belt. Anchored somewhere on the building. You don't want to be carrying things in your hands while you're walking up the ladder. All right, so those are the most common things that I see in ladder safety. All right, so our next topic, I know we're moving right along here, hopefully you're keeping up, is personal protective equipment. Now, OSHA loves to cite on personal protective equipment. Now, that doesn't affect you personally or your bank account, but it does affect your company. So it's easy to forget as you walk out of the truck to put the hard hat on or your safety glasses or everything. So I'm just a big fan of doing just a quick check as you get out, make sure you have everything before you go about your day. All right, so the objectives of this training this month is to understand the Ppe Hazard Assessment process, which we're going to be going through in depth, understand why different types of PPE are selected, and know how to properly and care for your PPE. If you are asked to use PPE that isn't really going to help you or is going to potentially cause more harm, my challenge to you is talk to your safety department about it, talk to your customer about it, and say, hey, this is what we're seeing here. What do you think about it? Is this actually what's necessary? Rather than just saying, oh, this is what they said we need, let's just use it without even thinking about it. So, and that's part of the hazard assessment process. So the hazard assessment is really evaluating the hazards for every job function that you do. Determine what hazards are present, if they're present, and then check for them to all different parts of the body. What can happen to our head here, our arms, our hands, our feet, where could we get hurt doing this job? And then determine the correct type of PPE. Sometimes we just have our prescripted PPE, we just wear it, and we're not really thinking about it. So that process is documented, and we're going to start with the face and the eyes. So, our particles flying around, is there metal? Hazardous liquids that can get into our eye, acidic or caustic liquids that can get into our eyes, gases or vapors, light radiation, etc. And then determining, hey, we are welding here. Maybe, we're not welding ourselves, but we're walking by. Maybe we should wear some glasses that are going to protect us from that. Then you move on to the lungs, really the health areas. So are we breathing in particles? Are there vapors or fumes? Is there not enough oxygen? We want to find out where it's coming from. Can we isolate it? Can we shut it down? Is it just something we got to live with? What is it that we're dealing with here? And then review the work process. Can we work upwind rather than downwind? And then monitor the exposure via an air monitor, etc. Then we're going to look at our ears. We need to conduct a noise survey, monitor the people that are working in loud areas, determine over time every year, are we losing our hearing? We went over this last month, and then lastly, repeat that monitoring every year. So head hazard assessment, are there objects that can fall on us? Are there exposed electrical conductors that we're dealing with? Low-hanging obstructions? And that's really, things that can drop on us, or, things that we can bump into. When it comes to our feet, here's a good cutout of what a safety-toed boot looks like. You're going to have your, different types of coverings in there. Aluminum, or some version of aluminum is pretty common, but they also have polycarbonate, and different PVC materials to protect from electricity, etc. So something going to fall on us, roll into us, sharp objects that can puncture us. Electrical hazards, again, you don't want a metal-toed boot if you're working around electricity. Slippery walking surfaces, do we have a good, slip-resistant grip on the bottom of our feet? Hazardous materials, chemicals, etc. that can soak through, or cold weather conditions. Making sure we have a boot that's insulated for those types of purposes. So any of these things, we're going to look and say, yeah, not only do we need a safety-toed boot, we need this specific type of safety-toed boot, and they're all ANSI rated as well. All right, hand hazard assessment. So different things can happen, obviously, to our hands. We can get chemicals that absorb into them. We can get severe cuts or lacerations, abrasions, rubbing, punctures. This is extremely common with gloves of most types, but they do have puncture-resistant gloves as well. Chemical burns, or just, chemical exposure. Thermal burns, and then lastly, frostbite. Are they insulated when they need to be? And most of us up here work in the cold. If we're wearing gloves, we're making sure they're actually keeping the cold out. Clothing for our body. Are there hot or cold materials or objects that we're dealing with? Hazardous materials such as chemicals, welding hazards, heavy, sharp, or rough materials, moving machinery, and then also fire and flame. So I put that in the hot or cold materials or objects. So is our FR, is our clothing actually going to protect? Now with FR, two things you need to note. One, there are two different types of FR. One is for electricity and arc flash, and one is for flames or flash fires. So make sure you have the NFPA version, and it'll say that NFPA, FRC, I think it's class 1 through 5, and then not the NEC, which is for electrical, unless, of course, you're an electrician, and then you need the NEC type. All right, moving into eye protection, we have a few different types. We have prescription eyewear, shaded filter lenses, face shields, goggles, and safety glasses. All these need to be ANSI Z87 approved. You'll see that stamped right there on the inside, and that means it's designed to protect from impact from especially small, sharp objects. The shaded filter lenses here, they actually can block different colors. So these yellow ones actually block the blue color. So you'll notice when you put them on, everything seems more green, even the sky. So that's blocking the color blue. Now, some of them block red, some of them block lasers, a lot of different types out there. Just make sure you have the right type for the type of work you're doing. The goggles, these ones here, they're Elvex. We all these you can order from our store. I just took screenshots from our online store, baseandsafetyus.com, and you can pick the right type that you need for the type of job that you're doing. Just make sure it's stamped ANSI Z87, which all of ours are, obviously. So making sure that they fit comfortably is important. They can't block or distort vision. Make sure you put them on, obviously, before you're exposed to something. They should be cleaned regularly, disposed when damaged, and anything that has scratches or prevent clear vision, you got to get rid of them and get new ones. Sometimes spending a little bit more on those can actually prevent the scratching because they'll be scratch resistant versus some of the cheaper ones. All right, so we have a couple different types of respirators that we can use out there. We have air purifying respirators, filtering face respirators, air supplied respirators, and SCBAs. Now, sometimes the SCBAs will work with the air supplied respirators, but as you can see in the picture on the left here, that's an individual hooked up to a hose who's doing some gas testing or some thieving there at the tank, and he's got his 30-minute pack on hooked up to an airline. So just depending on the type of job you're doing. Now, wear and care of proper respirator equipment, a few different things you need to make sure you're doing. One, fit test needs to be done for each type of respirator that you're using. You want to inspect the equipment every time before you use it. Also do a leak check, and then make sure you have medical approval to wear a respirator before you go and put one on. So, first thing you want to do is check the seal, then clean it regularly, store it properly, Make sure it's in some sort of container or case that won't get crushed or smashed or full of dirt or dust. So typically we put it in a nice little bag inside of a Pelican case, and that usually keeps the dust and material debris from getting into it. So different types of hearing protection out there. You have canal caps, ear muffs, and ear plugs. The reason I've got the ear muffs out here, those are typically over 100 decibels, and I know I went over this last month, but making sure you have the right type, especially over 100 decibels. So head protection, we want to make sure we have a proper fit, inspect it each time before we use it. That can be difficult with too many stickers, so keep that in mind. Make sure it's cleaned regularly so you can see cracks and other things, and then obviously use only protect the head. It's not a hammer, or a bludgeon device. It's a hard hat. Then we move into foot protection. We want to make sure there's plenty of different types. We have steel-toed or hard-toed. Sometimes they're, as I mentioned before, composite or etc. Metatarsal protection, that protects the top of the foot where the laces are. Puncture, slip resistant soles, chemical resistant, in certain cases. You can see here on the right we've got some of those boots. Waterproof, we have cold weather footwear, and these all need to be ANSI Z41. So that's where you see that. Z87 for glasses, Z41 for boots. So we want to make sure they fit comfortably, are inspected before use again, no cracks or holes, and especially in the chemical or waterproof boots. Check soles for excessive wear so you're not slipping all over the place, and keep as clean as possible. So selecting hand protection, we have gloves for chemical resistance, we have Kevlar for cut resistance, leather gloves for heat resistance, extreme temperature gloves. If you're working around molten metal, you probably want to make sure you get a pair of those. And then also ones for working around electrical. So depending on the type of work you're doing, you want to select the right type of glove. Next, we have fall protection. We want to make sure it's fitting tightly. There aren't any defects at all. There's no nicks, cuts, scrapes. There's no writing on the harness. There's nothing that doesn't look deformed, twisted, broken, or anything of that nature. We need to be able to read the tags. Now, usually for that reason, they're kind of inside of a little Velcro patch on the harness, so you want to make sure you can read those properly. Connectors must move freely, not be rusted, dented, out of shape, etc., and that the D-ring should be in the right place at all times. So wear and care of hand protection, again, just want to make sure they fit properly, they're clean, there's no holes in them, etc. All right, so for work clothing, different types of work clothing out there. Long sleeve shirts and pants is important, protecting all the skin. Flame resistant or flame retardant clothing, we need to have that. No loose clothing or jewelry. I recommend having a rubber wedding ring if you can. And then again, if you need chemical resistant clothing, make sure you're wearing that. All right, so kind of wrapping this up this month. Appreciate your guys' attention. We're going to keep this one a little bit shorter. Every job function in every department needs to be assessed for hazards, and then the correct PPE for the different body parts is recommended. PPE is selected as a part of that process, and we need to make sure it's provided. And then every other possible method of protecting is done. So we had an instance this week where somebody was using a controller and they set it on top of a joystick, and that joystick moved and moved a part that actually struck somebody. So in that instance, there was no engineering control to prevent that joystick from being pushed, which ultimately hurt somebody. Now we could give everybody extremely thick boots, and like metal, protectors around their boots they walk around in, or we could do the engineering control of preventing accidental impact or connection with that joystick. So ultimately, everybody, PPE is the last line of defense, and you need to remember that. It's not the first thing that we do to protect ourselves. It's the last thing. But when we go to do a hazard assessment, we want to make sure that every little nick that could happen, cut, puncture, scratch, exposure to chemical, etc., is accounted for. And then as a last line of defense, if we can't remove all those hazards, then we bring in the PPE. And also we need to be taking care of it, making sure we're inspecting it every day before we use it. All right, well, that's all we got this month. Again, if you guys don't know, if you review us on Google or Facebook, LinkedIn, wherever, every year we give away a shotgun, and then throughout the year we give away gift cards. So last year was a guy from KLX that won the shotgun from a review on Google. Feel free to put your name in there. Just write a short review. Let us know how we're doing. At the end, as always, there's a spot in the quiz for you to write me back, and you guys have given some feedback, which has been extremely helpful. So keep it up, and I appreciate you guys, and we'll see you next month.